Hi boys and girls, it's Dr. Edwards here. I've got a great story for you today and an even better activity. But I wanted to start off and remind everyone about our yearbook. Here it is. Anna Maria's on the cover, Kyla's picture's on the back, and there's lots of fun pictures inside, boys and girls. So for $15, get your yearbook, payforschoolstuff.com. Talk to your parents. All right, boys and girls. Today I'm gonna read a story called The Giant Hug, and it's all gonna make sense what your Unplugged challenge is gonna be this week. So this Giant Hug is by Sandra Horning. What do you want to send Granny for her birthday? Owen's mother asked. A giant hug, Owen replied. He opened his arms as wide as he possibly could to show how giant the hug would be. Do you want to draw a picture of you hugging Granny? His mother asked. No, Owen said. I want to send a real hug. I'll give the mailman a hug and ask him to send it to Granny. They gathered their letters and walked to the post office in town. Soon they got to the front of the line and Mr. Nevin called out, "Next!" I want to mail a hug to my Granny. Will you please send it? Owen asked in his most polite voice. Well, we don't normally send hugs, but I suppose we could give it a try, Mr. Nevin said. Owen's mother wrote down Granny's address for Mr. Nevin. Owen walked behind the counter, opened his arms as wide as he possibly could, and gave Mr. Nevin a giant hug. Please make the hug just as giant when you pass it on to the mailman, Owen said. See him right here giving a hug? Oh, I won't see the mailman who delivers it to your Granny. I give the mail to Miss Porter, who sorts it and puts it on a truck to the big city. After that, it's put on a plane and flown across the country, Mr. Nevin said. Well, you will have to hug Miss Porter then, Owen said as Mr. Nevin carried the mail to Miss Porter. Mr. Nevin looked down awkwardly at Miss Porter as he handed her the mail and the address of Owen's Granny. He blushed and mumbled, and here's the hug. Mr. Nevin opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Miss Porter a giant hug. Miss Porter smiled as she sorted the mail. Just then, the driver came to collect the mail bound for the big city. As the driver lifted the last heavy bag of mail, Miss Porter said, Leroy, one more thing. Someone is sending a hug to his Granny. Here is the address and here is the hug. Miss Porter opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Leroy a giant hug. Leroy laughed and said, now that's a piece of mail you don't see too often. Leroy whistled on the way to the big city after unloading the mail. He checked the schedule to see who was driving the mail to the airport. It read James. Leroy found James in the break room eating his morning snack. Hi, James. I know this seems a little odd, but a hug is being sent through the mail to someone's Granny, and this is her address, Leroy said. Leroy opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave James a giant hug. James cringed. He was not the hugging type, but he would do his job. So he's literally sending a hug through the mail. Later that afternoon, James arrived at the airport. He asked a mail handler when the mail was being loaded onto the plane. That mail was taken to the plane a few minutes ago, the mail handler said. James rushed to the plane where Captain Johnson was getting ready to board. Captain, a kid is sending a hug through the mail to his Granny. Here's the address and here is the hug, James said with a grimace. James opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Captain Johnson a giant hug. Now, isn't that a grand way to start the day, Captain Johnson bellowed. When the plane landed, Captain Johnson walked to the airport post office. He saw Amanda standing next to a mail truck looking sad. Hello, are you driving the truck to the city? Captain Johnson asked. Amanda nodded glumly. A hug is being sent through the mail, Captain Johnson announced. Captain Johnson opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Amanda a giant hug. Amanda brightened and said, "Thank you." She bobbed her head to the music as she drove after unloading the mail. Amanda went to find Chad, the driver taking the mail to Granny's town. "Chad, a hug is being sent through the mail. Here is the address, and well, here's the hug," Amanda said as her face turned red. Amanda opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Chad a giant hug. Chad chuckled and said, "Finally, do you want to go dancing tonight?" "I'd love to," Amanda exclaimed. Chad kicked up his heels and hopped in his truck. Early the next morning, Chad drove to Granny's town. "Oh, we're getting close." As he prepared to return to the city, he remembered the hug. "Who will be delivering the mail to Penside today?" Chad asked the supervisor. "Shelly, but she's not here yet," Miss Greenberg replied as she adjusted her glasses. "Please pass this along to her," Chad said. Chad opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Miss Greenberg a giant hug. Miss Greenberg gasped with surprise and her glasses tilted to the side. That was a big old hug. "Shelly, I need a word with you," Miss Greenberg called when Shelly arrived. "A hug is being sent through the mail to a boy's granny, and you are the mail woman delivering it," Miss Greenberg said. Miss Greenberg opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Shelly a giant hug. "Granny will be delighted," Shelly exclaimed. Shelly stopped to smell the flowers as she delivered mail from door to door. She saw Granny gardening in the yard. "Miss Lewis, I have a special delivery for you," Shelly said. "Your grandson has sent you a hug." Shelly opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Granny a giant hug. I love this part. Granny grinned and said, "That's the most wonderful piece of mail I have ever received. You send that grandson of mine a big kiss." Granny puckered up her lips and gave Shelly a big wet kiss on the cheek. Oh my goodness. And look, here's her grandson with a big kiss on it. It came all the way back to him. Now, boys and girls, I know we're going through a time right now where we can't see all of our friends and our loved ones like we want to. So your unplugged challenge this week is to mail a hug. Not quite like this one, but you're gonna make a paper hug and mail to your grandma, your aunt, your uncles, your friends, or anybody you can think of. I'm gonna post the directions on Facebook and send it to your parents, okay, boys and girls? Have a great weekend, and I will see you next week. Bye.